Hello, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter here again with another exploration in mixed media. I'm going to be creating this canvas. Basically, it's a variety of different materials that I've layered up and then done some special effects on. So let's make a start. I began with a piece of single weave canvas which I scrunched and distressed, and I'm going to adhere that to this board canvas with some Bindex. So this is one beauty of Bindex, the fact that you can use it with lots of different types of materials, and it will seal the surface as well, giving a great base for your paints so they won't seep into the fabric. Now, apologies about the autofocus. I did actually switch it to manual focus shortly after starting this video, but for this bit it does go a bit squiffy. Anyway, Bindexing that canvasy texture on, and then while that was still a bit wet, I stuck down a piece of lace ribbon and then added some more Bindex to seal that in. Because I'm using so much wet media and I'll be using a lot of water later, that's why I wanted to use a board canvas so that there wasn't the risk of sagging or drooping. Now I'm trying to make sure I don't gloop a lot of that Bindex in. I still want to keep the texture. So I've done the layer that I wanted, and I'm now just going to dry that off with a heat tool. You could use a hairdryer on a warm setting, whatever you want. Just try and keep the heat moving so that the Bindex doesn't bubble. I have removed the sound from this video, but that is actually a quiet heat tool. Depending on how thick you put it in will depend on how fast it takes to dry. Now this heart was something that I did with my Scan and Cut electronic cutting machine, but it could equally be a die cut heart or a paper cut heart. It's just a single layer of cardstock, and again I'm sticking it down and sealing it in with that Bindex. And just trying to make sure that I retain the detail and that those little sections don't get all clogged up with the medium. The brush strokes will add texture to this piece as well. Now this is 2 die cut butterflies that I've stuck together with some glue, and then I've also glued on top a laser cut piece of card in the shape of a key. Basically these are all those little bits that you kind of end up with in your I'll use it someday box. But the beauty of this is that you can use them within your mixed media canvases and start using up that stash. Now again, I'm just stippling through just to pick out all of that Bindex and make sure that it doesn't clog in all the little holes and orifices. And then a quick dry off to make sure that what I do next won't be affected by the Bindex. And basically the next job is to trim off the ribbon. I could have actually taken it around the back, but I thought trimming it off would look better. If my scissors worked. And then basically I'm going to do several coats of gesso, drying each layer as I go. So gesso will be slightly translucent, so it will still show through some of the original colour of what was underneath, but it adds basically that white tone to it. So again, I'm just going in with thin layers because I need to keep the texture of what was underneath. And the risk, especially with the fine woven fabrics, is that you could clog up those holes with either the Bindex or the gesso. So by doing thin layers, you avoid that risk. And then in with the heat tool to dry off that single layer. The gesso dries much quicker than the Bindex. Excuse me. So you can actually work quite quickly in doing several layers. And you can see how with each layer, the tone from underneath gets less and less. Now I'm going to be using some watercolour pastels, and I'll be smushing them directly onto the surface. In this case, the key, the butterfly and the heart. And then I'll be introducing some water via a water spritzer bottle. I'm just keeping the colour scheme nice and simple at this point, just to really help myself. So you can see how that watercolour pastel activates on contact, but there are sometimes quite a few chunks of it hanging around. So I like to sort of spread it out, and I wanted this colour to sort of spread out into the rest of the canvas too. So basically it was in with a random paintbrush and just stippling around, carrying it off to other areas. And I'm trying to keep the intensity of the colour in the middle. A couple more sprays of the water to help it spread. And I'm doing the directional spritzing deliberately as well, so that it pushes it out in different directions. And then just picking up some of the colour and splattering it, so that the origin point of the colour isn't necessarily set in stone. And you can see how nicely it sort of falls away from the Bindex and gesso and pools in the areas that I made such an effort to keep clear. Now I'm drying this particular layer off with the heat tool, as I wanted to keep some of the intensity where it was. Now with wax pastes and a shaving brush, I'm basically going to start adding some richness to the centre of the canvas. So I'm basically just using as little as possible on the edge of that shaving brush and just dry brushing it over the top. Or over the top of the areas with texture basically. I'm basically using a pink one first and then a blue on top, as I wanted to kind of create a purpley tone to go with the blues that I've already used. I'm now using the heat tool to melt off the wax carrier in the wax paste, and that will leave just the colour behind. And as the wax melts, it will also run a little bit and fall into the troughs of the texture. Which I don't know whether you saw at the start of the pictures. You can see lots of different textures going on. I'll show you the pictures at the end as well, close up, so you can see what I mean. Now I'm back in with another layer of the watercolour pastels. And the wax layer will also have helped to seal the previous watercolour pastel layer as well. So when I spritz this layer, it'll be sitting on top of the purple colour. Again, a liberal spritzing of water, so you can see why I sealed the canvas with both Bindex and gesso, and why it won't affect all of the underneath layers. Just spreading out with a brush. Spritz of water to help it run away from the raised areas of the design. And then I let that dry naturally so that the colours would puddle and pool. Next up, I grabbed some white bleed-proof ink, and I used that to start off a layer of dry brushing. So I'm just coating all the bristles of the brush, but not with thick gloopiness, just with as little as possible, so that when I brush this over, it will pick up the detail of the texture, but not run down into the troughs. For a more intense version of that, I decided to use some white acrylic paint. And again, smushing it thoroughly into the brush before I even take it to the canvas. Going in all directions. By going in one direction, you do get a very different feel and a different look, but whatever works for you. So you can see how also now that this actually makes all of the different layers stand away from each other, because you're catching the edges with that white and setting them apart from the colour in the background. I like to move my canvas around a bit just when I'm doing this, so that I really am going in as many different directions as possible. Not really sure how many different directions there are. Up, down, left, right, diagonally, all the bits in between. Anyway. Okay, I think I'm pretty much done with that, but I just wanted to add back some colour to that central area. So I'm going back in with some of that pink wax paste and really trying to just pick out the detail on the butterfly and the key. Again, melting that wax. It's not an essential step. You can leave the wax layer as it is applied. My preference is to do this because, as I say, it melts that colour into the lower regions of the texture. Another layer of white dry brushing with white acrylic paint. And this time I'm starting to sort of shade, add the white to the outside edges of the canvas. I'll continue with that in a minute, but I've got a little splatter brush here, and I wanted to just add some extra splatters of white to add quite a bit of randomness to this. So this brush gives quite fine splatters. Basically so I don't end up with a big massive blob, which is quite good. Okay, the very final step, and I'm going back to the gesso instead of the white acrylic paint because of the gesso's translucency and also moisture content. So this is for two reasons. One, I will be able to at least pick up vague hints of the colour from underneath, and B, it may actually also pick up some of that watercolour if it's not already set in place and spread it around a little bit more. But by intensifying the whiteness around the edges of the canvas, it's also going to help draw the eye into that central feature, which I've spent so long creating. Anyway, that would be the last part of it, and I would basically then leave that to air dry. And that's the job done. And there you can see all of those different colours, textures, dry brushing and spattering working together to create a lovely mixed media piece.